So we are in Chapter 2, Section 2, and we're talking about compounds of life. The compounds of life. Now this is really, this isn't a great title for this unit, for this chapter or this section, because water is like over 70% of your body, right? And that was in the first section, and that's certainly a compound of life. In particular, what we're talking about here is something called the macromolecules. And macro just means large. So these are larger molecules. Water is very small. So we're not talking about water in this section. We're not talking about the ions themselves, like potassium ions, which are very important for your health in your body, right? We're not talking about oxygen gas, which obviously is very important, right? We're talking about 4 classes of macromolecules. And they're all what we would call carbon-based. And we are a carbon-based life form, right? And we don't know if there are other types of life forms out there. Maybe there's some life forms that are based on neon or something. Who knows? Probably not, though. Probably not based on neon. Why would I say that? This is the essence of the first part of this section. Why is life carbon-based and not something like neon-based? What is neon? Okay, it's a gas. What kind of gas is it? It's a noble gas. What does it mean it's a noble gas? Remember that cheesy movie? All the shells are full, which means it's not gonna bond with anything. How are you gonna build an organism out of an atom that doesn't bond with anything? That's why neon is neon gas, because it's got so little attraction. Neon atoms have so little attraction for each other that they're essentially always a gas, except at extremely low temperatures. Okay? So how are you going to make life out of that? Going to be kind of hard. That's why carbon's important. Carbon atoms have a strong tendency to bond. Okay? In fact, they like to bond. They like to form 4 bonds. 4 bonds per atom. This makes them extremely versatile. It makes them extremely versatile. Now here's an interesting thing though. It's more than just the fact that they form 4 bonds. And to tell you the truth, I don't know exactly what it is about carbon. But silicon, the element silicon, Si, also forms 4 bonds. But it doesn't make living things. Does anybody know where you find silicon in nature? Seth? No? That's a good guess. Silicon, it actually forms these sorts of things. Sand. It forms, what'd you say? No, it's not coke. How come you guys always think I'm making a drug reference? That's not a good sign. It's not a good sign. This is quartz. You guys are being recorded, you know that, right? This is quartz. We'll play this for Mr. DiLoretto later. This is a piece of quartz, and it's silicon oxide. Now here's a really interesting thing. If you read your book, it talks about how there are thousands, tens of thousands, I think it is, of carbon molecules, different kinds of carbon molecules. There's a lot of different silicon compounds too. Almost all the minerals in the world are actually based on silicon. So you see there's something in common here. They both form 4 bonds. Silicon and carbon can both form 4 bonds. And they can both make a huge variety of different kinds of compounds. Think of all the different types of stones, rocks and minerals, and gems and stuff like that. But what's the difference between this and an organic compound, like a carbon compound? Well, for one thing, these are all very rigid, right? Kind of be hard to make a life form out of this kind of stuff. It'd be pretty cool if it was possible, and maybe it is happening somewhere in the universe, I don't know. But it seems like it'd be kind of difficult. How would they move? I don't know. It's all rigid. See, carbon compounds, for some reason, make flexible things. When you think about your own body, it's really pretty amazing. Think about, I was thinking the other day how tough skin is. Skin is actually really tough stuff, and yet it's flexible and soft. It's really strong for something so flexible and soft when you think about it. Or think about your hair. Your hair's really strong too. It's so thin, it's really strong. Those are carbon compounds. Skin is pretty tough. If you've ever skinned an animal, or if you've ever just taken the skin off a piece of chicken, right? Skin is really tough stuff. I mean, try to take a piece of chicken skin and rip it. You're not going to be able to do it, right? Unless you can get a really good grip on it. So we're talking about compounds that are really strong and really versatile. So these compounds, these carbon compounds, they can make, or I should say, carbon compounds can be really strong, and they're also very versatile. They can be very different, and that's where we get to the 4 types of macromolecules, right? They can be very different. So let's look at, first of all of the macromolecules involve these 2 terms. Sorry. So these are 2 terms you guys have to know. And they are polymer and monomer. Okay? Polymer and monomer. Mono means one, single thing. Poly means lots of them. And mer is like molecule. So basically, a polymer is a chain of smaller molecules, all put together to make one big molecule. A chain of smaller molecules all put together into a string, like say a string of pearls or something like that. This would be an example. In this case, this whole string would be a polymer, and then the monomers would be each individual gold ball. Follow me? So the monomer is that little gold ball, and the polymer is the whole string. Okay? Polymer, monomer. Just think monologue, right? It's one person talking. So mono is one, poly is many. Monomer is the single smaller molecules. Now I'm being kind of vague here, and we'll get into specifics with the 4 types. So the 4 types, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to give you a little bit more than your book gives you in terms of the function of these in our bodies. The 4 types of macromolecules. And we start out with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates. Let's break this word down. Carbo means we've got carbon in there. What do you think of when you think of hydra or hydrogen? You think of water, right? This actually has, when we say hydrate, technically it doesn't have water molecules actually, like you can't see the water molecules when you look at the molecule. But what it does have is both hydrogen and oxygen together. All right? And actually, a lot of times if you break down starch, water molecules are produced. So as part of that breakdown. But these are, carbohydrates have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And examples of carbohydrates are sugars. Sugars like glucose. Glucose is probably the most important sugar that we can talk about. C6H12O6. You should know that, by the way. You should know the formula for it. You don't have to be able to draw it, although you should be able to recognize it. It has kind of a ring structure. So let's look at figure 2-8 when you're studying. Look at figure 2-8. It makes a ring structure of carbons with hydrogens and oxygens sticking off the ends. So actually, your book. Let me just draw this. That way, that makes sense. Let me draw a picture of it for you in here. This is your books. The picture your book has is a little bit confusing. So. It's like a ring of carbons, but at one corner of the ring, instead of a carbon, there's an oxygen. And of course, all these lines are bonds. This is a covalent bond. Now, so far, I've used up 5 carbons and 1 oxygen. So what happens with the rest of them? Well, off of one of these, we have another carbon with 2 hydrogens. I know this is complicated, but try to reproduce this in your notes if you can. So it has this thing sticking off, which is a carbon with an OH off of it. And then the rest of it is pretty simple because they're all the same. You're going to have OH, 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 OH. And those of you who built the molecules saw these before. And then hydrogen, 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 hydrogen. Now this is just a flat picture of this thing, so you have to keep that in mind. It's just a flat picture. It doesn't show you the real geometry of it, but what I want you to remember, it's a ring structure, and that the ring is made of carbon. Okay? Now what you can do is you can actually hook these up, and I say you, I mean you're not going to be able to do it, but your plants do this. What plants do is they make a string of these. So if you string glucose molecules together, if you string glucose molecules together, you get starch. Now, animals don't make starch. Our bodies don't produce starch. Plants make it, and they use it as a storage for glucose. So they can store glucose. And glucose, by the way, is an energy storage compound, as we'll see later on in the year. But if we put these together, here's what you have. These are little hexagons, right? So this is a glucose molecule. It's a hexagon. And I can put these together, and your book has a nice picture of this, so if you don't like my picture. Is this hard to draw? There's one in your book, like I said, page 35 in your book. You'll see this picture. So if you have a hard time drawing it, basically look at this. I'm just putting a single bond between each one. And this could be really long. So this is a starch molecule. Now, what happens is there's like enzymes in your saliva. When you eat starch, so let's say you're eating bread or pasta, crackers, potatoes, hold it in your mouth for a while. And what will happen is the saliva has an enzyme in there called amylase. And it actually breaks apart the starch into glucose molecules, and it'll start tasting sweet in your mouth. No, not really. There was this, I can't remember what it was, but there's some tribe like in South America, and they use this starchy root for their like basis of their food supply. And they actually, what they do with it is they chew it in their mouth first, then they spit that chewed up mass into like this big grinding container, and then they grind up more of the roots with it. And the reason they do that apparently is because they're wanting the amylase in their saliva to break down the starch while it's in this big pot, I guess. So they chew part of it, then they spit it into the thing, and then they mix it all in. And I'm sure that's what's happening, is the amylase is breaking it down. So both of these things, folks, are energy storage compounds. And we're going to get into more details about that later. Our cells can use glucose for energy. So our cells can use glucose for energy. That's called, they can metabolize it, right? So they can use it to do cellular respiration. We're going to have a whole unit on this chemistry stuff behind what's going on when our cells get energy. Now, I'm going to say right here, they can also use other things. They can also use fats. Fats, proteins, even alcohol can be metabolized. And it's actually a good thing. I mean, if alcohol, what's that? Oh, I'm sorry. It says they can also use fats, proteins, and alcohol, and other things. I think there's probably other things, although I'm not sure. I'll say etc. So my point is, don't think that sugars and carbs are the only way you can get energy. It's not true. All right? We tend to focus on glucose because it's simple. And we're not going to talk about how fat gets used by your cells and stuff like that, but it can. It's more complicated, probably. I don't know. People who are on the Atkins diet, their whole body switches into a totally different type of metabolism called ketosis, where their bodies use a totally different kind of method for getting their energy. People say that they smell funny. Did you guys ever known anyone on Atkins? If you really follow it carefully, they say your breath starts to smell different and your body starts to smell a little different because it's actually, you're changing the chemistry of how your body's working. And that's because you're using primarily proteins and fats for energy. All right, that's carbohydrates. Now, there's other types I want to talk about. Oh, by the way, this is a polymer. This whole thing is a polymer. And the little glucose is the monomer. So starch is a polymer, glucose is a monomer. See how that works, polymer, monomer? Any questions on that? There's different kinds of polymers. Starch is just one type. Oh, you went over like plastics and stuff like that? Okay. Good, excellent. All right, there's another one I want to show you though, glycogen. I mentioned that your body can't make starch. So how does your body store glucose? Well, you might think it stores it as fat, and it's true it can store energy as fat. So it can take the energy from glucose and make it fat. But your body, when it produces, it also makes something called glycogen, which is a polymer of glucose that can actually be produced by your body. Oh, I want to say it's stored in the liver and maybe some other places, like maybe in muscles. I got to look that up. But this is how your body can store it for quick use. So this is where you get into the role of insulin. Insulin is this hormone that controls the amount of blood sugar, and basically what it's doing is it's telling your body to store the glucose in glycogen or to break it out of the glycogen again and make it available for cells. So it's this constant interplay. Insulin levels in your blood going up and down, telling your body to either release the glucose from the glycogen or store it in the glycogen. Constantly doing that. People who have diabetes have lost the ability to do that. So their cells are not sensitive to insulin anymore. And so they have to actually like physically regulate their blood sugar. Like people on diabetes might say, boy, I don't have any energy, so they're going to eat like a lollipop or something. It's because their body has lost the ability to say, okay, I'm going to release glucose from glycogen now to give you more energy. They're not sensitive to the insulin anymore. It's not working. The system's not working, so they have to physically add more sugar to their body when they need it. Glucose. Starch is the polymer. Okay, so glycogen is kind of like starch in people. All right, next, lipids. This is number 2, lipids. Lipids are fats and oils. So when we think about lipids, we're thinking about oily, fatty things. They can be used to store and release energy, as well as for other purposes. They produce padding and so forth, protection, but primarily for storing and releasing energy. Whoops. or release energy. Now they look like this. This is a basic lipid or a fat molecule. And this is also on page 35. So if you can't draw this picture or just want a better version of it, notice in my drawings, if you look carefully, you'll notice that the carbon always has 4 lines coming off of it. Right? It's always got 4 bonds. You'll also notice that the oxygens always have 2 lines coming off of them because oxygen forms 2 bonds. Sometimes they're double bonds. And now this is just a long string of carbons coming out like this. No, it goes on maybe like for 20 or 30 carbons. 20 or 30 carbons. By the way, petroleum is very similar, but it's not put together in 3 strands like this. It would just be a single strand of carbons. And there's hydrogens on every single one of these. I'm not going to draw all these because I don't even have room. But all of these have hydrogens sticking off the ends like this. And so on, dot, dot, dot. These are big molecules. They're bigger than glucose, obviously, right? Maybe not as big as starch, because starch can be really long. Those molecules of starch can be really long. But these are pretty big. And all these bonds can be broken up, and you can get energy from that chemical process. So energy can be released from fat. It's not going to be released as quickly as it is from like just eating sugar and having it go into your body and just boost your energy level. I mean, that's like instant when you eat sugar. You've instantly got available energy. The basis of the low-carb diets is to get your body used to using fat for energy instead of sugars. And the idea is that once your body's used to that, it'll start doing that. You'll start using fat instead of blood sugar. So what else can we say about these? Other lipids, another lipid is called cholesterol. So this is an example of a lipid here, or a fat molecule. And actually this specific kind is called a triglyceride. You see how it has three chains or 3 strands? 3 strands. And each of these things right here is called a fatty acid. And it's because if you were to break this thing apart, these little strands would have a little hydrogen on here that could come off and act like an acid. Right? Now, lipids are very important in your body, not only for energy storage, but as we're going to see, lipids are not only for energy. They're not only for energy. Cell membranes are made of lipids. So you would not want to have a diet with absolutely no lipids in it. Actually, absolutely no fats. Cell membranes are made of them. And cell membranes are extreme. I mean, without a membrane, obviously, there is no cell. Cell membrane is the outside of the cell. It's the outside layer. It's like the skin of the cell. So you need these things. They make your cells work better, right? Even cholesterol is part of the cell membrane. Okay, lipids. Next one is proteins. Proteins, they are polymers. They're polymers. Yep, this is the third one, sorry. They're polymers where the monomers are called what? Who knows? Who read the book yesterday? Amino acids, okay? Now in the human body there are a set of 20 amino acids that are essential to build all the proteins in your body. So 20 amino acids build all the proteins in your body. Now, when I was talking about carbon compounds being strong, this is what I was talking about, is proteins. Proteins are tough. Proteins make things like, they're a big part of your skin. Of course, your skin also has lipids in it too. Skin, hair, fingernails, connective tissues, so things that connect your organs to the inside of your body and stuff like that. Connective tissues. And then beyond that, proteins are what makes muscles for the most part. So muscles are made mostly of proteins. These long kind of stringy proteins that are all together and they can shorten themselves or relax. So proteins in muscles are like these long chains that can shrink like this or release. And so that's why muscles can pull. And they also make little mini machines in cells. And in cells they do all sorts of things like pumps. They act like little pumps, little channels. I mean, it's pretty amazing. When we get to talking about the cell parts, I'll show you some really powerful microscope images of some proteins. And sometimes they actually look like little machines. And they can make like bacteria have this little tail that can spin and push them through, or like sperm cells have a little tail that goes around and pushes them. Inside the cell, there's several proteins that are put together almost like a little electric motor, and it actually spins around. And it's like it's powered by ATP, and it makes this thing spin. So they form like these little mini machines in your cells, right? That's proteins. Now, the amino acids basically look like this. They all have this basic structure where you have a nitrogen, you have a nitrogen and two hydrogens. That's the amine part. Ammonia is NH3, nitrogen with 3 hydrogens. This is an amine. And then they'll look something like this. This is the acid part over here. Because this could come off, this is the acid part. And then down here, your book says is R. Now, what is R? R is not an element. If you look on the periodic table, you'll not find an element called R. So what is it? R stands for some big part of a molecule, okay? It could be a carbon ring, something like that. Another part of the molecule. And this is the part that varies from amino acid to amino acid. So different amino acids will have different R parts, and that's what makes them different. In fact, there's 20 different ones, right? 20 essential ones. And whatever those R parts are is going to determine how the amino acid works, how attractive it is, how repulsive it is, whether it's attracted to water or repelled by water, whether it's got a charge or not, that sort of thing. Now, what happens is two amino acids can join to each other. So I'm going to draw another one here, and this is going to look the same. And these two things can join together, forming a peptide bond. You should know that word. Peptide bond, forming the first little protein, because now we have a polymer of two of these things. I know this is complicated drawing, so feel free to just to the right. That's an H, sorry. And like I said, look on page 36 here and at the top, and you'll see what I'm drawing here. This is N, and then it goes to C, H. There's another R down here. And then, whoops. Got this? You guys got this. This is like a really small protein just made of 2 amino acids. So here we have, where did they join? They joined right here. Between the N and the C. This is 1 amino acid. This is another amino acid. Now a typical protein, folks, is probably like 1,000 amino acids long. And what happens is, those of you who are doing this little thing with these tapes last time, you got this long string of amino acids, and each amino acid has different characteristics, like a different charge or a different attraction for other ones. And so what happens is, as the cell is making this big string, it immediately like crumples itself up. Kind of like if you rip a piece of saran wrap out really fast out of the roll and cut it off, what happens? It all goes together. That's like what a protein does. But the cool thing is, it doesn't just make a mess. It actually crumples into a very particular shape that can then do a job in the cell, whatever it is. And engineers are actually trying to figure out exactly how it works. They're trying to like custom design proteins now is one of the things they're trying to do. See if they can custom design little tiny machines out of proteins. But anyway, that's a protein. That's the jobs they do. Any questions about proteins? Meat, mostly protein, right? Protein powder. Yeah, that's whey protein, which comes from milk, I think, right? Yeah. By the way, plants produce fats and oils too, right? Keep that in mind. Animal fats are not the only source of fats in your diet. Coconut produces a lot of fat. Avocado, a lot of fat. Olive oil is obviously a fat, right? So there's lots of sources of these things. Last one for you folks is nucleic acids. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to work on your assignments from yesterday. Nucleic acids I'm not going to spend a lot of time on right now because we're going to spend a whole chapter on them. This is DNA and RNA. DNA, of course, is the blueprint, or it's the blueprint for the whole organism. But it's more than that. It's not just the blueprint. It's still doing things. It's not like it's just when you're born that the DNA works. It's still doing things now, and the genes are still being used to make proteins and stuff like that, as we'll see as we go on. And that's this whole thing with the chicken, right? Chickenosaurus. Think about this. If you could make a dinosaur out of a chicken by turning on old genes that are still in the DNA, could you make like an ape out of a human? Could you make like the Planet of the Apes, where you had people who were like just as smart, but they were like gorillas? I don't know. I mean, it seems silly. It seems like science fiction, but at the same time, what's that?
No, he was like, that's dumb. Why would you want to make a Planet of the Apes? And I was like, well, that's not the point. The thing is, like, we would just turn on the strength part, not the crazy killer. So we would be the same way we are, just as strong as apes. Theoretically.
Yeah, theoretically. Now, it sounds kind of silly, like I said. It sounds crazy, but I think that when you look at the Chickenosaurus video, it's not really necessarily science fiction. Those of you who like to read, Michael Crichton has a great book called Next, where he covers this. And in it, they engineer, this was before Planet of the Apes came out, Rise of Planet of the Apes. Rise of Planet of the Apes totally played on Michael Crichton's book Next, because he had a retrovirus that carried a gene. And they put a gene into these chimpanzees or orangutans, I forget which, and it made them smart. And that's what happened in Michael Crichton's book Next, and that's what happened in Rise of Planet of the Apes. So maybe this stuff isn't science fiction, but even if you say, okay, it'd be nuts to turn people into gorillas, right? But what if there's genes you could turn on that are like resistance to certain diseases, for example? What if there's genes that are dormant that used to let our ancestors resist things like diabetes or something like that, that you could turn them back on? Now, the only thing I want you to know about DNA and RNA at this point is that they are polymers, okay? And nucleic acids are polymers, so this is the last thing, of nucleotides. And we are going to get into a lot more detail about nucleotides. So the monomer is called a nucleotide. And obviously they're very cool, DNA, and it does a whole lot of stuff in our cells. RNA we'll get to later. It's like DNA, but it's not quite the same thing. All right, question about these 4 types of macromolecules? This was longer than I intended to go. Sorry about that. So this is why I don't lecture, because when I do, I just drone on and on and on. Same thing you just heard.
Oh, yeah.